UNO has always been an expanding university, constantly moving forward. But as we move forward, we must also look back to where we began. Let's go back in time with the people who remember UNO the way it was. Join us for Reflections in Time.
It's a beautiful, warm day in early June 1989. And we're situated, as we often are, for these particular recordings in the Health, Physical Education, Recreation Building Faculty Lounge. And the reason we get together is not for the newness of the campus, but for the people and the things that have been here and endured often for a long time. Some years ago I began a series which I've called Reflections in Time. And at this point in 1989 we have 50 and more people and their reflections on the university, their own life, and the people around them. And today we're going to continue that, and to visit with me about that, I have with me Dr. Willis Rokes. Willis is a friend and colleague of many, many years, and we'll find out how many. And we're going to visit with Willis, a member of our business faculty for a long time at our business college. Willis, glad you could come by.
Glad to be here, Paul.
You know, Willis, we've known each other for many years, but I don't think I've ever really asked you where Willis came from.
Well, I guess my origination has to be the western states. That's where I spent most of my early life. I was born in Salt Lake City, and I lived in Idaho for a period of, probably 8 or 9 years. I lived in Long Beach, California for 3 years, and
was this as a young boy you were moving around?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I attended 9 schools by the time I'd gotten through high school.
What were your parents involved with it? Had you moving so often?
My father was a sign man. He was a gold leaf specialist who he did all of the gold leaf work for the Mormon Church, for example, and banks and various corporations in the Salt Lake and Intermountain area. He narrowed down to where he didn't travel very much, but during my childhood years, those were Depression years, and my older sister and I were parked with my grandparents while my parents traveled. And then on holidays and birthdays and things like that, they'd come and see us every month or every 6 weeks, and during the summer we sometimes traveled with them.
But the Depression days were hard days.
Yes, they were.
Evidently your family and lots of people.
The interesting thing about the Depression years was, I guess, being a young boy, I didn't understand what it was all about.
No.
We didn't realize there was hardship. Nobody had any money,
but know you were poor.
But living on a farm, you had plenty to eat.
Yeah.
I have a contemporary who was brought up in Detroit during the same day, and his family lived on dandelion greens and walked along the railroad track picking up pieces of coal for warmth. But we had lots to eat. We milked cows and had plenty of chickens and so forth.
The farm was a good place in hard days.
Right, right.
Yeah. Well then, you kept going and you went to school, and where did you end up after all these early move-around years?
I was sort of an outcast in the family, I suppose, in the sense that I was perhaps the first member of the family to really attend higher education, and I remember I was sort of compared with one of my cousins who attended Barber College, and I'm sitting there with 4 university degrees, and he went to Barber College, and they can't figure out what the hell I did for a living, but they knew that he could do something worthwhile.
Something practical. That's interesting. Well, so often people go to college out of a family background that includes higher education.
Yeah.
What, if you can remember this, what caused you to keep going, not get into a
I'd say the major incentive for me and the major motivator for me was my parents, who my mother went farther than anyone in her family for education, and my father was just an incredibly intelligent, self-made, highly educated person. Even though he didn't have the formal education, he was constantly reading. He had an incredible vocabulary, and he was just a high-class individual.
They set a good tone for you and also encouraged you?
You bet. Yes.
Where'd you go to college?
I attended the University of Utah. I had a bachelor's degree in, well, I finished it in 1948, but they didn't have mid-year commencements, so I got my degree in 1949. Then I went on to law school, and I received the JD degree in law, and then I took the state bar examination.
Did you go to law school there in Utah too?
Yes, I did. I became a member of the bar in 1952, both the Utah and the federal bar.
I see.
Then I went to work for a company. It was the largest general insurance agency in the state of Utah.
Oh.
And I was a staff attorney.
How'd you get tied in with insurance? Did that become sort of a specialty for you?
Well, that was rather interesting. I got interested in insurance when I was in college. I enjoyed the coursework in the first place. And then I happened to be dating a girl whose father was an agency manager, and he talked me into becoming an agent for about a year's period.
Your social life spilled over into the business.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure that was the major influence, but after law school, this was a period of time when there were turning out too many attorneys relative to the jobs that were available, and in the moot court case, the practice court case that we had in law school, one of the fellows that was working on the case, who was on the opposite side, was a claims attorney, or not a claims attorney, but a claims manager for a company, and he got me rather enthused about this idea. So he said it'd be an opportunity to use your legal education and very exciting work. So
you found it so?
I did. I thought it was. I think the major thing was that I was handling all types of cases. We carried all lines, primarily heavy liability cases, and I became rather a personal injury expert. I had the freedom working for an independent agency where I was not affiliated with companies, so I could represent the companies on subrogation work. I did a lot of collection work, and then I had my own legal practice handling personal injury claims and other cases, quite a variety of different things. I also did investigation work for a couple of firms of attorneys.
So now you're still in the state of Utah?
Yes. As a matter of fact, it was there that I met my future wife.
I was about to ask you where you met your lovely Catherine.
She was my secretary.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, and she was a little tiny thing, you know.
And she still is.
Yeah. She was about 17 years of age when she went to work for the company there, and she was my secretary, and after 2 years she became an underwriter, and she stayed with the company for about 7 or 8 years, I believe it was. In 1957, I left the company, although I stayed on part-time for half of the year and went back for a master's degree.
Oh, now you went on to graduate school.
Yeah.
Were you and Catherine married by this time?
No, we weren't.
Sounds like a long courtship.
We were engaged. No, we didn't really start dating until I suppose it was the summer of 1956, which was just before I went for the master's degree.
You've been colleagues for a number of years.
And then in January, I gave her a ring, and I finished my master's degree, and then September the 7th we were married. This was in 1957. And 3 days later we headed on back to Ohio State, where I worked on my PhD.
Wow, a big year for you, 1957.
Yes, it was.
Now,
I went from 170 pounds down to 137.
I bet you did. You were a busy guy.
Yeah.
Now, along that line, that interests me, Willis. You've been in the practice of law and specializing in insurance-related activity for quite a while, and bang, you go on for a master's, and now you're headed off for a PhD. Any special motivations here? You seem like you had a pretty good life going there, Willis.
I think the main reason that I decided to go back for the the advanced, the graduate degrees and so forth, was that I had been teaching at the University of Utah part-time for, probably 10 years.
Got a little taste of it, huh?
Yes, I enjoyed the teaching. That was sort of a high spot of the week, and I was getting a little bored with what I was doing. Handling insurance claims, lots of times you end up handling routine automobile accident cases, and it gets to be a bore. And very frankly, I was bored, and I wanted a change of some sort. And so I went back to investigate working, getting a teaching certificate and teaching the elementary school level, because I'd been in Boy Scouts for many years, and I enjoyed that age group. And then I talked to the Dean of Education at the University of Utah, and we talked about money and so forth, and I decided that maybe I ought to go on, you know, and he says, well, don't get a certificate then, go on and get your advanced degrees, because you need the PhD before you can expect to get the success in the academic world. So that's what I did.
Went to Ohio State?
Yes.
At Columbus.
I applied for fellowships at various places. I was accepted at Harvard, Columbia University, University of Maryland, Ohio State, and some others.
You sound like you had some good solid credentials going by that time.
Well, I did, I guess. I selected Columbus because it was an insurance town, and I figured Catherine, my wife, could probably get a job real well, and I think I was a little apprehensive about going to New York and that area, because I'd never been back there. And the farthest east I'd ever gotten was Columbus, Ohio. And I'd sort of thought that was the far east when we got there, but...
Yeah, for a guy coming from Utah, why, that would be quite a ways east.
Well, Denver was the far east in those days.
Did you enjoy your time at Ohio State?
In a sense, yes. If you enjoy complete slavery. Long hours and very hard work. Huh?
Yeah. You worked right on through, though, till you got the doctorate?
Yes, I did. I got my PhD in 2 years.
And what was your area of emphasis then?
My major was insurance. I'd planned to major in management, and there was a professor there who influenced me. He said, with your background and experience, he said, you really ought to go in this other direction. There's a demand for insurance professors, and so I decided, why not?
And were you doing some teaching too as a grad student?
I taught both years I was back there. I started as an assistant, and I was an assistant instructor, I think is what they called us, except that on my second year there I was teaching 9 hours of coursework, which was more than full professors were teaching. Plus the fact a lot of them were off consulting and making money on the side while I was teaching their classes. I think I averaged 4 hours of sleep a night while I was there.
Yeah, when you say slave labor, you meant it.
Yes, it was. It was slave labor, but it had, we have good memories of the place.
Yeah, but my word, Willis, you must have put in a long schedule. You didn't spend a lot of years working on that PhD, and along with that you were teaching. It was like doing 2 or 3 jobs at once.
Yes, it was. Well, I've always tended to be very intense, and I stay on a job until it's finished, and so I've always had a high energy level and been very aggressive and extremely ambitious. So.
Hard to rest till the project's done, huh?
Extremely disciplined. So
that can work in a number of directions.
Yeah, it can. Yeah.
Now, you spent some years there, you and Catherine, worked hard, but you have, as you said, pleasant memories of the place, and you're ready to go out in the big world again in some other direction. What happened? What year was this?
I defended my dissertation in, I guess it was early 1961, and then I had, no, wait a minute, that wasn't it.
Well, the year.
Yes, I defended my dissertation, and then it was just a matter of typing it up and getting it in final form. So I left in 1961.
What were your prospects then? Where did you head?
I applied for jobs in the western states.
Trying to get back out.
I had no interest anywhere else. I applied for 15 different places, including several schools in California, Utah, and Montana, and I was offered 15 different jobs.
Well,
so
your credentials still were pretty strong.
The interesting thing was that the best offer I got was the University of Montana.
Is that
in Missoula, Montana.
Missoula.
Yeah, they offer pretty good to get you there, and then when you get there, then
can't find your way out.
Then you can't find your way out. If you stay there too long, you're stuck. You can't afford to move.
Big place.
We stayed there 2 years, but it was a nice place to go because my grandparents lived up there and a lot of relatives, and a lovely place.
Pretty good fishing and hunting country.
Oh yes, I went fishing regularly, and I went elk and deer hunting, and I really enjoyed it.
Well, now you're getting a real taste of teaching.
Yes.
And how are you enjoying it? Were you able to teach the things you wanted to teach at this
Yes,
point?
pretty much so. As a matter of fact, the dean said that if I ever left him, he'd lose 4 departments. So I was teaching business law and real estate and insurance and government regulation, and he even wanted me to teach statistics one semester, as I recall. I threatened to jump out of the building if he did.
Now, coming off a tough period of research, dissertation, and teaching at Ohio State, I would think you'd be kind of sick of research for a while. Were you mainly teaching up there in Montana, or were you getting your feet wet in other areas too?
Once I got my PhD in December of 1959, I had 3 days of elation. And then I started worrying that everybody was passing me by.
Oh, boy.
So I immediately got started, and I cranked out a monograph and some articles, and I started working to get professional certification in insurance. I went after the Chartered Life Underwriter designation, and they advised that I ought to take one of the 5 parts. They said you shouldn't try to overdo, and I said, well, what if I take all 5 parts? I feel equally weak in all 5 parts. They said there's only a dozen people in the country that'll try all 5 parts,
and I bet you do.
And out of that, only 3 will pass.
Yeah.
So I took all 5 parts, and I passed it.
That made 4.
Yeah.
Great.
So
you proved them.
I was glad to get that out of the way.
Yeah. Well, now, your qualifications are getting stronger and stronger, and you're looking around and getting ready to leave Montana, probably, aren't you?
Yes, I was. I realized that the potential up there was very bad, and they're about 50 years behind the rest of the country on educational philosophy. Papers spend all their time talking about high school, and the university was perceived as a threat to the community. So
you didn't feel too wanted.
No.
In the community. So what happened?
It was a hard place to leave, though, because it was such a lovely place. We could go out in the afternoon and fish. I bought a canoe while I was there and ran rivers, but it was an economic decision we had to make, and I received a telegram from John Lucas here at University of Omaha.
University of Omaha starts to rear its head. Did you have a family other than Catherine by this time?
Well, yes, we had John, our oldest son, was born in 1959 while I was working on the doctorate in Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was about 2 years old when we came to Omaha.
Oh, you had added responsibilities. Well, dear John called you, or wrote you.
Yeah, I got this telegram, and I...
Ever heard of this place by that?
No, my first reaction was, where the hell's Omaha? And I talked to some people about it that had been back here in the Dust Bowl days, and they said, oh my gosh. And I had gone through here real fast one time. A friend of mine and I went back to Lansing, Michigan, picked up a new car and drove through here about 90 miles an hour, but I couldn't remember the place. So I came back here because I thought, you know, Montana's cold. I'll go down to the southern states in Omaha and warm up. And I came down and I was parked in the old Fontenelle hotel down there.
This is when you were looking the place over?
Yeah, a dusty room. I had an asthma attack the first night, and I thought, oh my gosh, is this the way it's going to be? But John Lucas was quite an interesting guy. I was quite impressed with the the people. I'd never, I was given the red carpet treatment.
Who were some of the people you first met along?
Oh, you know, I was going through some of my debris I was going to throw out, and I have a list of the people that I interviewed, or that interviewed me, that is. And President Bale, of course, Mr. Borchers,
from the board,
member Board of the Regents, Vero Rhodes, John Brownrigg, who was the Vice President of the United Benefit Life, Charlie Doan, who was the President of the CLU chapter, Gerald Hall, who was with CLU, Russ Bowie, who was CPCU President, and then various people on campus. Dean Woods, who was the old dean, you know, of CAE, they called it the College of Adult Education. See, I was hired originally here 50% in the College of Business Administration and 50% by CAE.
What attracted you to us at that time?
Money.
You had a pretty, was it money mainly?
Money and opportunity. Plus the fact, as department chairman, and I was offered a position as associate professor. I'd been assistant at Montana, and I couldn't seem to interest them in giving me a promotion that year, so I said, well, too bad, I'm leaving.
What year was this?
In 1961. I came here in the fall of '61. Went back to Boston. Spent a month there at a fellowship with the John Hancock Mutual Life Insurance Company, and a 1 month tour of the building, and then prior to that I'd gone up to Saskatchewan and spent a week up there doing a research study for a paper I was presenting in New York City in December, and all the time I was in Boston I was writing a couple of articles, so I didn't see much of Boston, but my wife did, and my son was there, and my older sister was traveling with us at the time, Betty. And another fellow that I chatted with was Ralph Kiplinger.
Oh, yeah.
Who was he was the chairman of the board of Guarantee Mutual at that time. So those were some of the people I talked to when I first came to campus.
Let me ask you about that too. You came, as you say, for money. What was the place like, as you recall it, when you first saw it?
Well, of course, the buildings that were here when I came here was the old building, the original building, which is now Arts and Sciences, and that's where I had my first office. It was an incredible excuse for an office. It was a broom closet they'd cleaned out, and it had a wall that went up about 2/3, you know, and that was it. And it was pretty dismal. I had 6 classes when I started, 3 night classes, 3 day classes, 18 hours. I had 360 students. I taught those courses, and I spent about 3 weeks in the community visiting insurance companies. I gave probably 15 talks in the community during that fall and early spring. And just before Christmas, I resigned from the university.
How so, Willis?
I just decided. I was very upset because my professional adult level courses, the CLU and CPCU classes, these were mostly graduate students. And they had them stuck in little tiny rooms where they couldn't breathe, let alone pay attention to class. They're much too big. I had a CLU class that had 72 students in it, which was unbelievable. You know, you shouldn't have more than 20 in there. And I just told Dean Lucas that there wasn't any way you're going to maintain this kind of a program with this kind of a situation. And he says, now, Willis, he says, don't get all excited. And he says, what you ought to do is write down all of these things, changes that you think there should be, and we'll go in and talk to Dr. Bale. So I did. I wrote up about a 12-page bill of particulars and marched into the Dr. Bale's office with Dean Woods and Dean Lucas, and nobody said a word. Dr. Bale just read through this, and he'd read number 1, and he'd say, well, maybe we can make a change here. And then number 2, he'd read that and he'd say, oh, this is ridiculous. And then he would go on, and this is the way he did. So anyway, I guess I must have been satisfied because I stayed.
Oh, you had previously literally resigned. So
yeah, I had. I was going to the Christmas meetings. The Allied Social Sciences meetings met at Christmas time, and I was going there and look for a job. And I'd only planned to stay in Omaha for 2 years originally, and
as you head in Montana.
Right. Yeah. And then I was going to move on, but I stayed for 28 years.
After that first withdrawal from active duty there in the first year, you just settled down and evidently liked it, huh?
I traveled around the United States doing jobs at different places. I worked in Philadelphia for 5 summers, and I was offered a job at Temple University for 3 years in a row. I was offered a job at the American College of Life Underwriters for 3 years in a row, and at that time they were paying compensation equivalent to that of Harvard University. I think they had them leveled as a triple A, you know. Parsons College, I think, over here, and
Iowa,
and Harvard were rated in the same category, and so was American College at that time. But I didn't like it back there. I didn't like the pace, didn't like just the way things were done. One of my friends back there said he sent one of his kids off on a Boy Scout outing and had to tip the scoutmaster, and that sort of turned me off. And
as a former Boy Scout leader,
I just didn't like the pace of things. And we lived in enough places around the United States that we really liked Midwestern people. We liked people in Nebraska. We liked friendly, we liked the pace, a good place to live, and so forth.
And the university was changing a bit too, wasn't it, or getting toward that?
Well, it was. Now, I was the second PhD in the College of Business Administration.
Yeah.
George Harris was the first. We were not accredited by the American Assembly of Collegiate Schools of Business.
No.
And Dean Lucas was pushing hard to upgrade the quality of the faculty, and we kept getting better, I thought. And I think probably the most, if I could point to one factor that kept me here, particularly during those early years up until the retirement of Dean Lucas, it would be John Lucas himself. He was just the kind of a guy who was good to work for. He'd get mean as a bear during registration time, and we had some violent arguments, but he was a mentor. He was always supportive. He called me into his office one time and he said, Willis, he says, I pay you more than I make. Did you know that? I said, no, I didn't. He says, but he says, that's the way it should be. He said, the professors around here are the ones who are doing the important work, and administrators are just facilitating their work.
Did you get that recorded?
I should have done. I'd like to send a copy to all of the administrators.
Well, you got along well with your dean. Well, of course, I would add, as you say, that I don't know of anyone, Brett, who didn't get along with John Lucas. He's a wonderful man, both professionally and personally in other ways, too.
He was the probably the dominant dean on campus in terms of influence with Dr. Bale, at least. And I think Dr. Bale tended to look at productivity and the fact that the business college were turning out so many students relative to other colleges, plus the fact he was a pragmatist. He realized what supply and demand was in the market, so he understood that. And I know one of the questions you generally always ask people is, what did you think of Dr. Bale?
Why don't you go ahead and answer that one? Because I've asked that a number of times. I get a variety of interesting answers.
Yeah. I was an admirer of Dr. Bale. I enjoyed him. I think he knew exactly what was going on all over. And he required the department chairman give him a monthly report, and I'm sure he read it all. And there were a lot of things about him, idiosyncrasies, that people disliked. He'd herd faculty into convocations, for example, never tell them what it was going to be about at all, and we'd find out it was some damn thing to sell us tickets to the World Series of baseball, or they were trying to peddle life and health or accidental death insurance on campus. I complained about that for so long, I finally got rid of that deal, having salesmen come on campus and sell us insurance. But he was a very interesting guy, and I have good memories about him.
As long as you started into talking about people, and started, I think, very appropriately with our former boss, and a dynamic one he was, Mabel L, maybe you could search through your memory a little more. You mentioned John Lucas, your dean, but a place like ours, and every campus, is made up not of buildings in strength, pretty much, but people. And on the professorial side, or any other side, what are some of the names that kind of leap out at you when you think back over your 20-some years here, Willis?
Well, some of the people that I thought were very important to this campus, and people might disagree with me about it, but I think Dr. Kirk Naylor was an outstanding administrator as a business administrator, and then as he became an acting president, I think the man showed a great deal of ability to adjust and to educate himself, and to and as I say, adjust to circumstances.
He was a president in a tough period.
Yes, he was, and I always admired Dr. Naylor. I think he was an extremely honest individual.
Yes.
And I admired him a great deal. I had an opportunity to work with him during the merger activity, going down to Lincoln to try to keep from having everything stolen from us in the process.
Yeah.
Fringe benefits, our summer pay situation, our tax-sheltered annuity situation, and so forth. And while we're on the subject of that, I'd like to point out an individual that I think that was extremely instrumental on this campus, and that was Mr. Harold Kiefover.
I'm glad you mentioned Harold.
Harold was one of the most valuable people we had on campus. It was through his efforts, to a great extent, that we got the tax-sheltered annuity program, and he went to Washington, D.C. in order to get an opinion from the IRS so that we could retain it after the people in Lincoln said they were going to take it away from us. And I worked with Harold a great deal on insurance committees and on things like that, and I helped wheel his wheelchair up several flights of stairs to get him into the administration building down there on the Lincoln campus, because there's no other way to get into that damn building. And I just had a very high respect for Harold.
Yeah, he was a real giant in that wheelchair, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
For all of us. Yeah.
He was a great guy.
Other people, maybe one or two. I know it's hard when I put the finger on you to think of people sometimes, but maybe there are a few others that you'd like to mention.
Well, a lot of the people in business administration that I have felt that were really important in my past came and went. You know, we've had a big turnover there.
Oh, yeah.
And I think one of the people that I always remember is Marshall Bull.
Yes.
Marsh was my best friend when we first came here, and he pushed along. He was always a loyal friend, and then about the time John Lucas retired, things sort of came unraveled. I never did know why. I still don't know why. But
no. Tragic end to a very productive life.
Yeah. Well, this was before that occasion. We were going through the throes of trying to hire a new dean, and the question was whether we should hire inside or hire outside. And Marsh wanted, he was kind of, I think, heir apparent to John Lucas had we hired from inside. But I think the prevailing feeling of the faculty was they wanted someone from outside. And then we went through 3 different selection committees in order to hire a dean because we didn't have enough money on the table to give to them. We'd bring in department chairmen who were excellent people and offer them the job, and they say, I'm making more money than that as a department chairman. So,
another thing I wanted to ask you about, and I asked just about everyone we've put the tape here in Reflections of Willis, and you mentioned that you worked with Naylor in it, and I wondered about your feelings early on when you first heard and as we came toward that merger back in the 1960s. What was your opinion? You'd been here quite a few years by that time.
You wouldn't believe it, but last night I was going through a bunch of debris. I'm hauling stuff out of my office and taking it home, but I came across a letter I never even remember writing, but I do now. But
looks like it's...
This is dated July 6, 1966, to Dr. Leland E. Trewick. Dear Dr. Trewick, the Omaha newspaper probably hasn't run anything on the attached, and I thought you might find the item interesting. The state of Pennsylvania currently is having its troubles with branch campuses of institutions of higher learning, Pennsylvania State, Temple University, and others. The Academy of Educational Development Incorporated, an organization retained by the state, believes that the branch campuses are too small, short of funds, and sorely lacking in library facilities. A second firm, Ralph R. Fields, is equally critical. This provides a good example to demonstrate to the unicameral that it is in the best interest of the state of Nebraska and of the city of Omaha that the University of Omaha retain its autonomy in any scheme involving state finances.
Well, that's pretty clear in terms of your position at that point in time.
As a newspaper account reveals, the Pennsylvania Council of Higher Education believes that such branches are inferior educationally, and the council believes that local education should be controlled locally but financed in part by the community and supplemented by state and federal aid. Now, as far as my opinion of the merger is concerned, this pretty much reflects it. I think it was inevitable that we had to do something because municipal universities at that time were a dying breed.
Yep.
We had to have financing. But the problem was we should have probably been Nebraska State University, and we should have had our own separate board of regents. An impossible situation with the climate the way it was here. The political climate, the political power, and this is something I learned after I've been here for a while, most of the powerful people in Omaha had their loyalties directed toward Lincoln. They send their kids out of school to schools out of state or to Lincoln. And I found this particularly was true in the insurance industry and still is. That the loyalty of the business community, not so much now as it was, but for the most part is directed toward Lincoln. You take a look at four-year universities in the United States, you'll find only a comparatively few that have the enrollment of the University of Nebraska at Omaha who do not have doctoral programs. Of those that don't have doctoral programs, you'll find that virtually all of them are in California or New York. It's just very unusual for an institution the size of UNO not to have a doctoral program. And I think it's because of the fact that we have been relegated to an inferior political position here. We've been kept down. I really believe that.
And you still feel...
And I still believe it is true, yes.
So, as we do this in 1989, you still wish we'd done it differently, am I?
Oh, yes. But I believe in my evaluation of the power structure at that time that it would never have been possible, and it probably isn't possible right now. It may be in the future. But you remember, what was it, Paul Williams, he was the editor of the Sun newspaper, and it was Paul whose investigative team, along with Paul, that won the Pulitzer Prize for the Boys Town expose thing. Well, Paul did a study on the Omaha power structure and identified the people who ran this community. And if you do an analysis, an evaluation of who those people were, you found that there were very few that really had their basic loyalties to this community in terms of education.
Mm-hmm.
We were not perceived as a major university in those days.
Mm-hmm.
I think the perception is growing. We're getting more alumni that are important. They're growing up, getting older. Much of our alumni in the early years, of course, were bootstrappers,
yeah,
scattered all over the world.
Right.
But
any other major elements of university life that you were involved with that you'd like to put onto this tape that you'd like to mention?
I'd like to mention my part in the changeover of the retirement system. When I came here, we had an individual retirement plan that was where we paid an insurance agent a commission every time we gave them money to hold for us. And then they decided that they were going to change it over to a group plan. They set up a regents, faculty, staff committee. Now, I was brought in late in the picture. There were only two faculty representatives, me and Bill Hockett. And they'd already decided they were going to change this individual plan over to a group plan under the same insurance company. And they had some old figures that were about 25 years old that they compared with TIAA Kraft to show that the group plan with this local insurance company, you've heard of it, Wild Kingdom Insurance Company,
Yeah.
to show that it was superior than TIAA Kraft. And I happen to know the president of TIAA Kraft, William Greeno, and I called him long distance. I says, Bill, I got some figures here that stink. I want to send them to you, and I want you to compare and tell me what's wrong with them. And he did a rush job on it, and he says they're using figures that are 25 years old, and he sent me some new figures. The only thing that saved us in the changeover was that the state law said that we had to have individual retirement contracts. That meant in order to go to a group plan, they had to change over to they had to get a change in legislation.
Oh.
So in the meantime, there was a turnover in the Board of Regents. Some of the people that were real, I would say, opposed to passing on any savings to the faculty. They wanted to go back to the city of Omaha. Peter Kiewit was one. Some of those regents left, and we got new people. And by contacting members of the Board of Regents, like Verrill Rhodes and people like that, we managed to get up a study committee to study this thing, because I brought up enough doubts in their minds that something wasn't wrong in the figures that they were looking at. Mm. So they set up a committee, and they took the Regents actuary to be the advisor on the thing, a fellow named Mark Twinney. And it didn't take us too long to get Mark around to where he believed we were right. And we just went through, and everybody agreed that it was the best thing to go to TIAA Kraft, and there was a vote on it. I think about 97% of the faculty voted to accept the plan, and I think that was a great contribution. Under the plan that we had with R.D. Marcotte Company, which was an agent of Wild Kingdom Company, not only did they charge us a commission for the money that we gave them, but they didn't give us a cash value. They didn't give us any cash value to our retirement plan during the first 2 years of its existence. Mm-hmm. So I lost over $1,500 in the conversion over to the TIAA Kraft because of this deal. It was an incredible, absolutely wonderful retirement plan for R.D. Marcotte.
Mm-hmm. But not for us.
No, it wasn't. Well, I remember at that time there were two faculty members whom I could name who retired that year, and they had accumulated during an entire lifetime of teaching $10,000 to retire on.
No, by those standards, our retirement possibilities today are wonderful.
Yeah.
And you were heavily involved in that. I'm glad you mentioned that. We don't have anything on these tapes that tell us about that interesting part of our history. You know, we're running a little low on time here, and I want to get some other things. Willis, you got some of the interesting things to share. We got to ask you a few more. One of the things you did when you were here, and one of the first ways I got to know you was because I could look in the Public Pulse, and there would be a letter, a nasty letter maybe, or a take-him-to-task letter from Willis. And Willis took on, among other things, as I recall, and let's mention that one, and I'll zero in on the phone company. What was your beef with the phone company? Let's go back over that briefly.
Well, I'd been teaching government regulation for quite a number of years, and had studied the telephone company, and it was an unregulated monopoly. It was the biggest advertiser in the country, and it had so brainwashed the American public that it completely anesthetized public inquiry and rendered government regulation impotent. And so I wrote an article that appeared in the Nation magazine attacking it, and I had something published in the Wall Street Journal, and I intervened with a friend of the court brief in the Carter phone decision that the phone company lost, and I hammered away on it for quite a while. The thing that finally broke the back of the phone company and its monopoly, its back isn't broken, it's doing real well now, but the thing that broke its grip that it had at that time was an explosion of new technology. It wasn't the efforts of people like me. I might have caused a dent in its side,
you
but it was
in the saddle, though.
Yeah, it was microwave communication and so forth, and many people that wanted to get into the emerging areas of new innovation, you see, that caused the change. They just could not control everything that was exploding around them, and that caused the change.
You know, now that you've decided finally to retire, I could ask you a lot of things, but I think I would stay with the kind of work you've been involved with now for lots of years here. You've done consultative work, you've been teaching, you've been doing research. As you look back over these many years here on our campus and in general in your professional life, Willis, what have you enjoyed the most, do you think?
Well, I've obviously enjoyed the teaching. I think, however, if it had only been the teaching, I would not have stayed at a university setting. I also wrote 24 books and monographs and over 130 articles, and I enjoyed writing. But I've given a great many talks around the country, and I've done a lot of consulting. I've worked for about 7 publishing companies, editing and writing assignments and so forth. And I've gotten involved in recent years as a legal expert witness and consultant. I'm working on a case right now. As a matter of fact, I spent 8 hours on it yesterday, and then this morning, just sitting on the floor and thumbing through depositions and papers and advising attorneys on trial strategy and also on insurance issues about which they don't understand.
Your combination of legal work and teaching has been a nice combination for you, hasn't it?
Well, it really has. I think it's been a marvelous type of thing. The interesting thing was, when I was in high school, I thought maybe I'd get an MD degree. I was going to be a physician. And it was primarily my father that kind of talked me into going into law, which I had no interest in at all. And I would say probably I had very little interest in law all the way through law school. Then when I got out and started practicing, then you start learning law, and over the years I've been extremely grateful and that I went that direction, because it is a marvelous field. It's like going to school and studying what life is about, what the problems of people are, and you're able to fit into a lot of different niches, there are a lot of different opportunities, I think, that present themselves. So,
education generally, you've been a part of it so long now, at our level here at the university, or any level, we have technology, like with the phone company. It's been changing the field of teaching and learning too. How do you think we're doing educationally? Are we better now than we were 25 years ago, or are we kind of down the wrong track? You've got a lot of definite ideas, and I'd like to hear a couple of them anyway, if we have time here, Will.
I don't know. It seems like every 5 years, it's kind of like the great 5-year plan they come up with. China's the expert at it, but they come up every few years and say that education is going down the drain. I was reading a report just yesterday about that we probably are better now than we've ever been, and yet everybody's saying how bad we are, but we are actually the envy of other countries in terms of our educational quality. Even though perhaps our college graduates are not at the math and science level that Japanese high school graduates are, we perhaps aren't as good in some areas, but, and these are things that we have to improve on. One thing we've got to improve on is to acquire more of a international sort of emphasis, a focus on study of other cultures and languages. I think they ought to start teaching language in grade school and get people to the point where they can learn things. I'd like to see all business school graduates be required to take a semester of work in another country where the language is different. It really opened their eyes. I spent 6 months teaching in West Germany, and it was a marvelous experience. I've been to probably 25, 28 different countries, and my wife and I are going to Scotland this fall and do a little walking, and but I think that over the years I don't know. As I say, fads come and fads go, and they've got all kinds of new ways to do things. At one time, they thought that teaching students by television would be the perfect way of doing it. And hell, they got in there and they found out most of them were asleep. So, and then the big computer thing, this was a way to teach them. They found out that most people use computers just for word processing. Well, just the word processing skill on the computer is, I think, an extremely important skill for students to learn nowadays, because from there you can move into data processing and graphics and so forth. And, you have to learn those skills now, I think, in order to enter today's world.
Speaking of today's world, and you gave us a good picture of some of your thoughts there, and I thank you for that. But now you're retiring, and as I've listened to you share yourself with us here for the good part of the past hour, you've been a very busy guy.
We haven't been here that long, have we?
Yeah, we have. And, Willis, seems like when you took on a job, you took on more than the job. And I got a feeling that in retirement, you're not going to be too retired. What are some of the things you have going and that you would like to be doing, along with going to Scotland and doing some walking with Catherine?
Well, I'm probably when we get back, I'm going to do more of the expert witness work. I've never advertised. I've gotten all my jobs by referral. I've got a couple of books that need revision. I've got an editing job that I must continue with. I don't have to continue with it, but I'm going to. And if I run out of things to do, I'll figure out some new ones.
Well, when you run out of things, we can do another tape.
Yeah, how about that?
I appreciate you coming by and just sitting and chatting and telling us about yourself, your family, and your work, and some of your observations on lots of things. It's been interesting.
I enjoyed it.
We've been here in 1989 at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, reflecting on the life and times of Willis Rokes.